Chocolate chip cookies, 1930s. The chocolate chip cookie was never supposed to exist. It began as a kitchen improvisation in the 1930s at the Toll House Inn, a popular roadside lodge in Whitman, Massachusetts, run by Ruth Wakefield. Known for her desserts, Wakefield often experimented with new recipes to keep her guests happy. One afternoon, she set out to make a batch of chocolate butter cookies. Lacking baker's chocolate, she chopped up pieces of a Nestle semi-sweet chocolate bar and folded them into the dough. Her assumption was that the chocolate would melt, spreading evenly to create a solid chocolate cookie. Instead, the chunks held their shape, softening into small, gooey pockets with each bite. Her guests loved the unexpected result. The Toll House Chocolate Crunch Cookie quickly became a sensation, drawing attention far beyond her inn. The recipe was eventually published in local newspapers and then picked up nationally. Nestle struck a deal with Wakefield to print her recipe on every package of their chocolate bars, and in exchange, she received a lifetime supply of chocolate. In 1939, Nestle introduced the first bag of chocolate chips, created specifically to make Ruth Wakefield's accidental cookie invention easier for home bakers. Potato chips, 1853. The invention of potato chips traces back to a single restaurant, a single customer, and one chef's burst of frustration. In 1853, George Crumb was working as a cook at Moon's Lake House, an upscale resort in Saratoga Springs, New York. The restaurant was known for its fried potatoes, but one customer kept sending his plate back, insisting the slices were too thick and too soggy. Crumb tried again and again, but nothing satisfied the diner. Finally, Crumb decided to make a point. He shaved the potatoes paper thin, fried them until they were crisp and brittle, and sprinkled them heavily with salt. He expected the customer to hate them, but instead, the man loved them. Word spread quickly, and soon patrons began asking specifically for Saratoga chips. Crumb eventually opened his own restaurant, serving baskets of the crisp potatoes at every table. Within decades, the chips were being packaged and sold beyond Saratoga, eventually becoming one of the most popular snack foods in America. Popsicles, 1905. The popsicle is one of the most beloved frozen treats in the world, but it wasn't created by a chef, a food scientist, or a big company. It was invented by an 11-year-old boy, entirely by accident. In 1905, Frank Epperson of Oakland, California, mixed a sugary soda powder with water to make a homemade drink. He left the cup on his porch overnight with a wooden stirring stick still inside. By the next morning, a cold snap had frozen the liquid solid. What he pulled from the cup wasn't a drink anymore. It was the first frozen ice pop, stick and all. Epperson kept making his frozen treat for friends and family, and years later, in 1923, he patented his Epsicle Ice Pop. His children convinced him to rebrand it with a catchier name, Popsicle. The frozen dessert soon spread nationwide, becoming one of the first mass-produced treats designed for kids. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Cornflakes, 1894. One of the most famous breakfast foods in America started out as an accident inside a sanitarium kitchen. In 1894, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg and his brother Will Keith Kellogg were running the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan, a health retreat that focused on clean living and strict diets. The brothers were experimenting with different grains to create a wholesome vegetarian alternative to the heavy breakfasts of the time. One evening, they accidentally left a pot of boiled wheat sitting out too long. By the next day, the wheat had gone stale, but instead of throwing it away, they decided to roll it out and bake it. To their surprise, the process created thin, crunchy flakes. Patients at the sanitarium loved the light, crispy cereal, and soon the Kellogg's began experimenting with corn instead of wheat, which gave them the product we now know as cornflakes. Coca-Cola, 1886. Coca-Cola was first created in Atlanta, Georgia, by pharmacist John Stith Pemberton in 1886. At the time, he was searching for a medicinal tonic that could relieve headaches, boost energy, and serve as a general cure-all. His original syrup was made from coca leaves and cola nuts, both known for their stimulating properties. Initially, the drink was mixed with alcohol, creating what was called Pemberton's French wine coca. But when Atlanta enacted prohibition laws banning alcoholic beverages, Pemberton reworked his formula. Instead of alcohol, he blended the syrup with carbonated water, which gave it an effervescent, refreshing quality. The new beverage was first sold at Jacob's Pharmacy in Atlanta, where it was marketed not as a soda, but as a temperance drink and medicinal product. Customers came to the soda fountain for its unique flavor and stimulating effect, and within a short time, demand began to grow beyond the pharmacy counter. By the late 19th century, Pemberton's creation was already shifting away from medicine and toward becoming a commercial soft drink, laying the foundation for what would eventually expand into one of the most recognizable brands in the world. Champagne, 1600s. In the 17th century, winemakers in the Champagne region of France were struggling with a problem. Their wines often underwent a second fermentation during the cold winters and warm springs. Instead of finishing in the barrel, the fermentation would restart after bottling, causing unexpected fizz, and in many cases, bottles exploding from the pressure. At first, this was considered a flaw. The Catholic monks who managed many of the vineyards, including Dom Pierre Perignon at the Abbey of Auville, worked to eliminate the bubbles. But over time, methods developed to control and contain the secondary fermentation. Stronger glass bottles imported from England allowed the pressurized wine to be stored safely, and corks replaced wooden stoppers to trap the gas. The result was a sparkling wine, distinct from the still wines of other French regions. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, this accidental fizz began to be appreciated by aristocrats and royalty, spreading Champagne's reputation across Europe. The region refined production methods further in the 18th century, transforming what started as an unwanted accident into the world's most famous sparkling wine. Slurpees/icy machine, 1950s. The frozen slushy drink that became a convenience store staple was created by accident in the 1950s. Omar Nedlick, a Dairy Queen owner in Kansas, had a broken soda fountain that couldn't properly chill his soft drinks. To keep serving customers, he put bottles of soda in the freezer. When they were opened, the drinks came out semi-frozen, with an icy, slushy texture. Customers loved it and began asking for the frozen Cokes on purpose. Seeing the demand, Nedlick worked with an engineer to design a machine that could replicate the effect consistently. The result was the icy machine, patented in 1960. The device used pressurized refrigeration to freeze a flavored syrup mix while keeping it slush-like and pourable. The IC brand spread through convenience stores and fast food chains across the US, and in 1966, 7-Eleven licensed the drink under a new name, Slurpee. The iconic frozen beverage was born, not from innovation, but from a malfunctioning soda fountain and some quick improvisation. Microwave popcorn, 1945. The link between microwaves and popcorn was discovered by accident during World War II-era research. In 1945, Percy Spencer, an engineer working for Raytheon, was testing a magnetron, the vacuum tube that generates microwaves for radar systems. While standing near the machine, he noticed that a chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. Curious, he began experimenting with other foods to see if they reacted the same way. Popcorn kernels gave him the most dramatic result. When placed near the magnetron, the kernels began to pop rapidly, spraying fluffy popcorn across the lab. Spencer realized that microwaves could excite the water molecules inside food, heating it from the inside out. This accidental discovery led to the development of the first microwave ovens, which hit the market in the late 1940s. They were enormous and expensive at first, but over time became household staples. Popcorn quickly became one of the most popular foods to cook in them, and by the 1980s, microwave popcorn was a product in nearly every American pantry. Worcestershire sauce, 1830s. The origin of Worcestershire sauce is one of the clearest examples of a flavor born from accident and time. In the early 1830s, two chemists in Worcester, England, John Wheely Leah and William Henry Perrins, were asked by a nobleman who had traveled in India to recreate a sauce he had tasted abroad. They attempted to blend vinegar, molasses, anchovies, tamarind, garlic, onions, and various spices. The result was so pungent and unpleasant that they considered the experiment a failure. They stored the leftover barrels in their cellar and forgot about them. Months later, when the barrels were opened, fermentation and aging had transformed the harsh mixture into a rich, complex sauce. The strong flavors had mellowed and blended into the savory, tangy condiment we know today. Leia and parents began bottling it for sale in 1837, marketing it as Worcestershire sauce. It quickly gained popularity in England and abroad, eventually becoming a kitchen staple in both cooking and cocktails. The sauce's signature taste, now iconic worldwide, came entirely from a batch that was almost thrown away. Nachos, 1943. Nachos were invented not in a restaurant kitchen, but in a small border town in northern Mexico, and completely on the spot. In 1943, Ignacio Nacho Anaya was working at the Victory Club restaurant in Piedras Negras, just across the border from Texas. Late one evening, a group of U.S. military wives came in after the kitchen had closed, looking for something to eat. With no cooks and no prepared meals, Anaya had to improvise with whatever ingredients were left. He cut fresh tortillas into wedges, fried them until crisp, and topped them with shredded cheese and sliced pickled jalapenos. He placed the dish in the oven for a few minutes, long enough to melt the cheese. The guests loved it. When asked what the creation was called, he simply said, "Nachos especiales," or nachos specials. Word spread quickly, and the dish soon appeared on menus across Texas and the Southwest. The name shortened to just nachos. Cheeseburgers, 1920s. The cheeseburger, one of the most iconic foods in America, was created by accident in the 1920s. The story most often credited goes back to Lionel Sternberger, a teenage cook working at his father's sandwich shop, The Right Spot, in Pasadena, California. Around 1924, Sternberger was grilling a hamburger when he decided to place a slice of cheese on top of the patty, either to experiment or to save a burnt piece of meat by covering it. Customers noticed the new creation and began asking for cheese on that burger. The idea spread quickly, with different restaurants around the country later claiming to have invented it, including places in Louisville, Kentucky, and Denver, Colorado. But Sternberger's shop is generally recognized as the earliest documented case. By the 1930s, menus across the U.S. were featuring the cheeseburger, and within a generation, it became a standard item in diners and fast food chains alike. Tootsie Rolls, 1896. Tootsie Rolls were born out of necessity and a bit of improvisation. In 1896, Leo Hirschfeld, an Austrian immigrant working in New York City, wanted to create a chocolate treat that wouldn't melt easily and could be sold for just a penny. At the time, chocolate candies were often fragile and expensive, making them hard to distribute widely. Hirschfeld began experimenting with cocoa, sugar, and other ingredients until he created a chewy, taffy-like candy with a chocolate flavor. It wasn't his original intention to reinvent chocolate candy into something stretchy and resilient, but the end result was exactly that, a sweet that held up in different climates and was cheap to produce. He named it the Tootsie Roll after his daughter Clara, whose nickname was Tootsie. The candy quickly became popular among children and working-class families, and its durability made it especially valuable decades later when it was included in soldiers' rations during World War II. Trail Mix, 1960s. Trail Mix, the classic blend of nuts, dried fruit, and chocolate, is one of the simplest snacks in the world, and it came about by accident through experimentation among outdoor enthusiasts. While combinations of nuts and dried fruit had existed for centuries, the modern American version that included candy was popularized in the 1960s during the rise of hiking and camping culture. Stories credit California surfers and backpackers with mixing raisins and peanuts for quick energy, then later adding M&Ms or chocolate pieces to balance the saltiness. The mix wasn't developed in a lab or by a food company. It was improvised by people who needed something lightweight, calorie-dense, and portable for long trips outdoors. Its accidental popularity was fueled by how practical it was: high protein from nuts, fast energy from sugar, and a balance of sweet and salty flavors. By the 1970s, packaged versions were being sold commercially. But the roots of trail mix go back to that era of casual experimentation, when a handful of snacks thrown together became a staple for hikers, campers, and travelers everywhere. Beer, ancient origins. Beer is one of humanity's oldest prepared beverages, and its discovery is widely believed to have been an accident. Archaeological evidence suggests that beer dates back at least 7,000 years, with early traces found in ancient Mesopotamia, China, and Iran. The most accepted theory is that early humans storing grain experienced natural fermentation. When water mixed with stored cereals, often barley or wheat, the starches broke down, and wild yeast transformed the mixture into a mildly alcoholic brew. Ancient Sumerians even worshipped a goddess of beer, Ninkasi, and preserved recipes in hymn form around 1800 BCE. These early beers were thick, cloudy, and often consumed with straws to filter out solids. From Mesopotamia, the practice of brewing spread across ancient civilizations, including Egypt and Europe, each adapting the process with local grains and flavorings. Over centuries, brewing became more refined, but its roots trace directly back to that first unplanned fermentation of grain and water. Yogurt. Ancient origins. Yogurt is one of the oldest fermented foods in human history, and its creation is believed to have been accidental. Archaeologists trace its roots back at least 5,000 years, with evidence in Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent. The likely scenario is that early herders carried fresh milk in containers made from animal stomachs. These skins contained natural enzymes and bacteria that thrived in the warm climate, fermenting the milk into a thicker, tangier product. What may have first been seen as spoiled milk quickly proved useful. Fermentation made milk easier to digest, especially for people who were lactose intolerant. It also preserved it longer, providing a reliable food source in hot regions where fresh milk spoiled quickly. Over time, yogurt took on cultural and culinary significance across civilizations. Ancient Persians, Turks, and Indians all incorporated it into their diets, and it was even considered medicinal in some traditions. The word yogurt itself comes from the Turkish verb yormak, meaning to thicken or to curdle. By the 20th century, yogurt production had been industrialized, but its accidental beginnings go back thousands of years to the simple act of carrying milk under the sun. Ice cream cones. 1904. The ice cream cone was introduced to the world at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, but its invention came out of necessity rather than planning. Ice cream vendors at the fair were so popular that many of them ran out of bowls and dishes to serve their product. Nearby, a Syrian concessionaire named Ernest Hamwi was selling zalabia, a thin, waffle-like pastry. To help the overwhelmed ice cream sellers, Hamwi rolled one of his waffles into a cone shape, creating an edible container for the ice cream. The idea was an instant success. Other vendors quickly copied the concept, and visitors loved the novelty of a dessert that required no dishes and left no cleanup. By the end of the fair, the cone had become a sensation, and within a few years, it was being mass-produced with specialized machinery. Though different vendors later claimed credit for the invention, the St. Louis Fair is widely recognized as the moment the ice cream cone entered popular culture, born out of an improvisation when supplies ran short. Tea, ancient China. The origin of tea is traced back thousands of years to ancient China, and its discovery is often described as an accident. According to legend, around 2737 BCE, Emperor Shen Nong was boiling water outdoors when leaves from a wild tea tree drifted into his pot. The leaves infused with the hot water, producing a fragrant brew with a refreshing taste. Shen Nong tasted it and enjoyed the stimulating effect, and from that moment, tea began to spread across Chinese culture. Historically, tea drinking was first documented during the Shang Dynasty, when it was used for medicinal purposes. By the Han Dynasty, tea leaves were being boiled as a daily beverage, and during the Tang Dynasty, tea drinking had become widespread throughout Chinese society. From China, tea culture spread to Japan, Korea, and eventually Europe by the 16th century through Portuguese and Dutch traders. Teflon non-stick pans, 1938. The accidental discovery that led to Teflon and modern non-stick cookware began in a laboratory, not a kitchen. In 1938, chemist Roy Plunkett was working at DuPont, experimenting with gases related to refrigeration. While testing tetrafluoroethylene gas stored in pressurized canisters, he noticed that one cylinder had stopped releasing gas, even though it still felt full. When he cut the canister open, he found a slippery, waxy white solid coating the inside. That substance was polytetrafluoroethylene, PTFE, later branded as Teflon. It was chemically resistant, extremely smooth, and had one of the lowest friction levels of any material known. At first, it was used in military and industrial applications, including components for the Manhattan Project during World War II. It wasn't until the 1950s that French engineer Marc Gregoire adapted Teflon for cooking, creating the first commercial non-stick frying pans. From there, Teflon-coated cookware spread worldwide, making it one of the most influential kitchen innovations of the 20th century, all because of a solidified gas that formed by accident in a DuPont lab. Cheese puffs, 1930s. Cheese puffs, or cheese curls, were first created in the 1930s completely by accident, not in a kitchen, but in a livestock feed plant in Wisconsin. The Flackall Company produced animal feed using a machine that ground and moistened corn into pellets. When cornmeal was run through the machine with water, the heat and pressure caused the corn to puff as it exited. Workers noticed the strange airy texture of these discarded byproducts and began experimenting by frying and salting them. One employee decided to take it further. He flavored the puffed corn with cheese, creating the earliest version of the snack. The idea spread, and by the mid-20th century, companies began mass-producing cheese curls and marketing them as a packaged snack food. Eventually, this process led to brands like Cheetos, which debuted nationally in 1948. Granola, 1860s. Granola traces back to health reform movements in the United States during the mid-19th century, and like many foods of the era, it began as an accident in the kitchen. In 1863, Dr. James Caleb Jackson, who operated a health spa in Dansville, New York, was experimenting with ways to create a wholesome, whole-grain breakfast food for his patients. He baked a mixture of graham flour into large sheets, but the result was rock hard and nearly impossible to eat. To make it edible, he broke the baked sheets into chunks and soaked them in milk overnight. Jackson called his creation Granola, and it was one of the first ready-to-eat cereals ever made. A few years later, John Harvey Kellogg developed his own version, also calling it Granola, before renaming it Granola to avoid a lawsuit. Kellogg's recipe relied on baked wheat and oats, which crumbled into lighter, crunchier pieces compared to Jackson's dense original. Though it was born out of a failed experiment, granola became the foundation for the breakfast cereal industry and eventually evolved into the nut and oat mix we recognize today. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. Thanks for watching.